How's it going, everybody? Super stoked that you are here with us today. So we're very excited to be partnering with Podchaser today, and I'll make introductions here in just a moment to kind of give you the scoop on what we're covering today at a really high level, and then let Dave take on. I just want to say thank you so much for showing up for us today. But starting off, my name is Elsie Escobar, and I am the community expert over here at Libsyn. I, for the most part, run the conversations on social media as well as co-produce. Actually, I am the producer. I am the co-host of The Feed, the official Lib podcast. I've been around here at Libsyn since 2008, so I've kind of had my foot in the door with so many different things for such a long time. And I am here today with Dave Keine from Podchaser, and he's actually here to help us. I know that you all actually showed up here only because you wanted to hang out with us, but alas, I know that that's not the case. Every single one of you all are constantly asking how you can grow your show and how we can find you with all kinds of tools and what's the most important thing and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be covering a little bit of today. Dave is going to be talking all about the podcast growth funnel and actually talking you through so many different layers of discoverability, right? And one of the things that I personally am quite interested in knowing is a little bit more about Podchaser and how Podchaser falls into this as well for being found, particularly as such a innovative concept that I immediately gravitated towards when I first heard of Podchaser. So Dave, are you ready to take over?
I am ready.
All right, let's do it. Let's do this thing.
Hey everybody, I'm going to share my screen right here, and we're just going to go through a little bit of a presentation talking about all things optimizing growth for your podcast, and then we're going to hand it over and do a Q&A because I think that's where we get into a lot of really valuable stuff. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick.
Real quick is a relative. I'm just kidding.
Did it come up?
Yeah, I see all the things. You are all set to go.
All right. So, so we're optimizing for discovery, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff in the ecosystem of podcasting in general, but I'm also going to be talking a lot about Podchaser. So to give you guys just like a little bit of an intro of what we are. So Podchaser, a good way to think about it is kind of an IMDb of podcasting. We do everything that you would do when you're trying to find a movie online. So you'd go and look at ratings and reviews. You'd look at, who's in a movie. We do that for podcasting. So we allow you to rate episodes. We allow you to rate series. We track over 8 million credits out there. You can listen to us, or you can listen on our platform. And then we do all kinds of metadata and all of that, because at our heart, what we are is a podcast database. Three important things to think about when you think about Podchaser is we're a website, we're not an app. And that's actually strategic because everything on Podchaser gets its own dedicated web page, whether it's a creator, whether it's a podcast, whether it's an episode, and all of that gets funneled into search engines. So everything is discoverable on Podchaser. We work on desktop, we work on mobile, and we're really accessible in that way. Another thing is that we're agnostic. And really what that means is we're not trying to win like an app player category or anything like that. Rather, we're trying to provide data for the rest of the industry. So we partner with a bunch of apps out there. We partner with Radio Public, Player FM, Podcast Guru, places like that, to where when you add information to Podchaser, when you rate something, it actually splinters out and goes out into the rest of the podcasting world. So we play nice in the space, and we're trying to just kind of, raise all boats in the podcast field. And then finally, we're crowdsourced. So I mentioned we have 8 million credits that we track. We also have, profiles for creators. You can come on and leave ratings and reviews. You can do lists. All of that stuff is stuff that you can do to contribute to Podchaser. Now we have a moderation team that just verifies to make sure that, you're not saying that Joe Rogan's been a guest on every single one of your podcasts. But that is to say that we rely a lot on our users to add information to our site. And really what that also comes down to is, from its heart, Podchaser was built to drive podcast discovery for listeners and for podcasters. So we try to create things that and tools that really help drive that discovery. So this is kind of what it looks like. On the left-hand side, you'll see what a Podchaser page would look like. Pretty much every podcast is on there. If it's not on there, you can go to podchaser.com/add and add your RSS feed. But for the most part, we have everything on there, and every podcast gets its own dedicated page. On there, you have the about, you have creators and guests, you have reviews, the episodes, and you have lists. And if you claim your podcast, you can actually even add merch through our integration with TeePublic. In the middle, you'll see what it looks like when you have a creator profile that has credits on a bunch of different podcasts, and that comes in handy for people who are maybe discovering your show through a guest credit. And then two big takeaways from Podchaser is our trending data. So we have charts, but we also have something that's kind of like a news feed. And all of that is very much tied to activity on the site. So if somebody leaves a review for your podcast, you're going to go up our charts. They're going to get shown to people in our feed. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. So why are we all here? We're talking about podcast growth. And before we even start talking about, the practical tips, we're just going to talk about a little bit of what we're thinking about when we think about podcast growth. So this is somewhat of a harsh truth for people, but all adults here, and really, your podcast is a product. And what I mean by that is, when somebody listens to your podcast, they're getting something out of it. You could be a happy meal, but it could also be a work of art. It could be, the best picture of 2020 Parasite. People are getting value out of your podcast. So when we talk about growth, ultimately your podcast is at the center of it, and you have to be providing value to people, whether that's a laugh, whether that's informational, whether that's, interest in a topic they're interested in. So when you're thinking about all of this, think about the core of what your podcast does for listeners. And then we're also going to talk about the audience. So something that we don't necessarily always realize is that people want to listen to our podcasts. As we're coming up, it may seem like, we're trying to get people to listen to our podcast, but people already want to listen to our podcast. You made it for a reason. You made it to help people out, to provide them value. So when we're thinking about podcast growth, it's important to think about who your potential audience is. Who are the people who are going to listen to your podcast, who maybe just don't know it exists yet, who haven't made that leap from, even knowing you're there and listening to you. So one exercise that you can do, and it will help out for the rest of this, is to really create some listener personas. Who is your potential listener? There can be multiple, but think about who they are. Think about demographics. How old are they? Are they a parent? Do they have kids? Are they interested in a specific topic? Define that, and then define and brainstorm about what they listen to and why. So what are some other podcasts they listen to? What are they hoping to get out of a podcast? Put yourself in their shoes and really try to figure them out. And you can continue that on to which websites they're using, what social media platforms they're on, who are their friends, how do they discover new podcasts, all of that. And that's going to help us out. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the podcast growth funnel. And really what this is the journey that a listener goes through when listening to your podcast, and how it can potentially get you more listeners. So at the top of this funnel, we have discover. And this is really just knowing that your podcast exists. On the right-hand side, you'll see we're going from stranger to fan to evangelist. So before we hit the discover phase, these people don't know your podcast is even out there. When we get to the try phase, that's when they go from knowing you exist to actually hitting the play button, listening, hearing your voice, all of that. And then follow is somebody who comes back and comes back for return listens, who's coming back over and over again, who's subscribed to your podcast, all of that. And then share is kind of the ultimate place we want to get to, which is where your audience is actually evangelizing for you. They're telling their friends, they're posting on social media, they're posting on platforms, and that's where the really sustained growth is going to come from. So we're talking about optimizing for discovery today. So we're going to be talking primarily about that upper funnel, but really all of this, even though it's set out like a funnel, a lot of this kind of hits multiple levels, and again brings us back to, your product, you're bringing your podcast is bringing people value, and we need to get them to experience that value so that then they share it with their friends. All right. And how do people discover podcasts right now? So you can put it into three main buckets: organic, referral, and paid. And by organic, that's when somebody is searching. Maybe they're not, looking exactly for your podcast, but they come across it. Or they could be searching directly for your podcast too. But they come across it on their own. Referral is when somebody gets it recommended to them. And that can be via text message. That could be somebody talking to them on the phone, posting on social media, or through social platforms like Podchaser. And then there's paid, which is ads, which we won't really talk about today because that can be, a whole can of worms on its own, but it is something that's out there. So within these buckets, you have search and roundups. And this is actually one of the primary ways that people find podcasts to listen to. They go to Google and they search for podcasts about baseball or top audio dramas. And they click one of the top 5 results, which is most likely an article or a roundup. Another way to say that is a list. And they look at the list, and it's 10 to 20 podcasts, and they see what's interesting to them, and they click it and they listen. That's a big part of how people find podcasts right now. We talked about friends and social. That's a huge one. Platforms, discovery pages on places like Apple Podcasts, but also on social platforms like Podchaser. Hear about it on other podcasts, whether that's through a guest or through a cross promo. And then ads are obviously there. So let's talk about the discover phase. So our only objective right now is for people to know that you exist. And the first thing that we have to do to make sure they know you exist is get your podcast out there. Make sure it's on every single platform. So if they try to listen to you, you meet them where they are. Now, we have a link here that you can ask the Libsyn folks about, which is how to submit your podcast everywhere. If you Google it, there's multiple articles that do that. Pod News has a really good one as well. And just make sure your podcast is everywhere. If you've submitted to Apple Podcasts, you're probably on 85% of them, but really going the extra mile to get on the other 15 is going to help you out. And also think of podcasting not necessarily as, this is only a podcast, but really what it is at its core is audio and distribution. So you can be on every podcast app, but also think about things like newsletters. Think about things like YouTube, places that people may want to listen to your podcast or may want to discover your podcast. Think about that stuff. And again, if you want to get on Podchaser, your podcast is probably already there, which means you can go claim it. But if it's not there, you can go to podchaser.com/ad and just submit your RSS feed, and that'll get it added to our system. All right, so let's talk about SEO and PR. So I mentioned that one of the primary ways that people listen to or discover podcasts is by going to Google, typing it in there, typing in a category, all of that. So this is where understanding your audience your potential audience is going to come in really handy. So think about who your potential audience is, what they would be searching for to find podcasts like yours. And then we'll talk about a little bit further on how to get to the top of those lists. But really think about, what are the terms they're going to be going for? Are they going to be looking for, a niche idea? Maybe it's, a Dungeons and Dragons podcast. Are they going to type in best Dungeons and Dragons podcast? Are they going to be typing in a specific episode that's, interviews with a celebrity or an influencer in a space? Think about that. Think about how they would go about Googling for your podcast. And so that's kind of where we're at holistically. When we talk about SEO, we're really talking about the keywords, like I mentioned. We're talking about honeypots, which are basically pages where people will land on. And then we're talking about backlinks, which backlinks are links to the pages that you want to rank for. Each one of those has a little bit of link juice and helps you rank a little bit higher. So when we're talking about keywords, we talk about metadata with a podcast. So metadata is everything that goes into the hosting of your podcast, things like titles, things like descriptions, keywords, all of that stuff. A really good way to think about that is, what is the core message that I'm trying to deliver? What are the core topics that I'm hitting? Make sure that those keywords are involved somewhere in that process. When we talk about metadata, we're also talking about the external stuff. So I mentioned on Podchaser, we track creators and credits. If somebody's looking for, say you had Conan O'Brien as a guest on your show, Conan O'Brien guest appearances on podcasts, that will show up as a Podchaser page and they'll be able to click through and see that. So make sure you go onto places like Podchaser, make sure you fill out your profile with links, claim it. You can add links, you can add creators, you can add custom categories. So you're not necessarily limited to the 30 or so that are on Apple Podcasts, and you can get a little bit more granular there. Go on there and make sure that everything is fully, fleshed out with the data there, and that's going to create a wide net for your keywords. Second is owned backlinks. So I mentioned that backlinks are what kind of sends that SEO juice and helps you rank higher in a Google. And so there are opportunities for you to increase the number of backlinks to these pages, whether it's your Podchaser page, whether it's your Apple Podcast page, whether it's your website, all of that. So two ways to do that. One is to set up within your show notes, set up links to your Podchaser page, set up a link to your website. That will get distributed to all those different podcatchers that you're on. And even though a lot of them kind of limit themselves from being used as SEO juice, some of that gets through. So make sure you're putting some links in there. Don't go crazy, but think of, the top ones, whether it's your website, your Podchaser page, places to rate and review, all of that. Put those in your show notes, and that will help you out there. Second is, if we're talking about a website is a good place for people to find your podcast, but it's also a good place to harvest those backlinks so that you have a million different places and they're all getting ranked a little bit higher in the search. So use your website to set up links to every podcatcher out there, to your show on there. So your show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, everywhere there. And then also use your website to kind of go a little bit crazier with your keywords and provide a little bit more information. And all that's going to do is add another honeypot for Google to find you at. Next, we're going to talk about PR outreach. So if we're trying to get into these articles, a lot of those are run by bloggers, publications out there. And the way they kind of work is they get a request to hit a specific topic. So maybe it's best tennis podcast. They know that provides them a lot of traffic on Google. So what you can do is find places that are writing similar articles to ones that maybe your users or your audience would be looking for. So like best tennis podcast, go find a tennis blog out there that has written these before. Note down who's writing them, and then just send them an email that says, hey, I checked this out. I saw that you're writing about, tennis podcast. Could you include mine in your podcast list? Sometimes they'll do that. Sometimes they won't, but it helps to kind of reach out to them and get that stuff there. Another tactic you can pull with PR is to find places that have written podcast articles or lists about other topics. So maybe you have a best tennis podcast, but you also found a site that had the best fitness podcast, and you say that's kind of similar. What you can do is create a list of probably 5 podcasts, put yours number 1 there, and then send them an email that just says, hey, thought you might be interested. Here are the 5 best, tennis podcasts out there. Basically, you do the work for them by writing the article, including links, including descriptions there. Send it to them. You'll get a success rate of maybe 30%. But when they go and write that article, you're number one. And the dirty little secret around all of that kind of blog industry is the next time somebody has an assignment where they have to write about the best tennis podcast, the first thing they're going to do is go Google the best tennis podcast, and they're going to copy a lot of what is already out there. So you can potentially create a mechanism for you to get out there more and more and more. And then Podchaser fits into this a lot. So I mentioned the metadata, making sure you're fully fleshed out there so that when somebody does search for your guests or for a specific category, you show up. But we also talked about PR and lists and all of that stuff. And Podchaser actually allows you to kind of jump the line on that. And rather than doing all of that kind of messy outreach to a PR person or to a blogger, what you can do is go on there and use our lists feature and create that list that you think would appeal to your potential audience. So if it's, we're talking about tennis podcasts, if it's the 10 best tennis podcasts out there, or if it's 10 podcasts about Wimbledon, create that list, put yours in there, put yours at the top, but fill it up with 9 others that are really good. Google loves us. Podchaser lists rank in the top for a ton of different categories. So make a list like that, add a description, put yours in there. It's something that serves you, helps you out with your organic reach, but it also serves our users. You're making a good list. You're putting 9 other great podcasts in there, and that's going to help out everybody. So if you're looking for really easy turnkey things that you can do to grow your podcast right now, I really suggest you hop on Podchaser, make a list with a clickable title, and put yours in that list with a bunch of other awesome podcasts. Okay, now we're talking about social. So one of the things that I do as kind of the head of marketing at Podchaser is I oversee our social. So I kind of have like this inside view of what goes on when people are trying to promote their podcasts. Elsie, I'm sure you know as well. Yeah. So when you think about social, what you really want to think about is maximizing engagement. And I know that's kind of sounds cliche, but let's break down kind of why that's the case. So you want to encourage people to repost, because all of a sudden your post gets shared to all of their other people. Likewise, if your post gets a like, it gets shared to audiences at a smaller clip, but it still gets shared. So you want to encourage reposting. You want to encourage engagement. Some of the biggest reposters and opportunities for you out there on social media is to appeal to places like Podchaser, places like Buzzsprout, places like Libsyn, places like Apple Podcasts, all of that stuff. And you have to put yourself into the mind of who's running those social media accounts. So you want to see, okay, this person, what do they want to do? And I can tell you, as somebody who often runs our social media accounts, I want things that make Podchaser look good. That's a link to my site and my site only. So I see a lot of posts that I would love to share, but they put in links to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, and 5 other places.
Hey, Dave, I'm going to stop you right there, because what you just said right now is like gold. And nobody gets this. So I would love it if you could repeat what you just said, because people do this all the time, and it is one of the biggest pet peeves for the larger brands, and it's why they don't retweet you. It's why they don't want to share your content. So I'm going to pitch you the ball once again, and go ahead and finish with that same thought again.
Absolutely. I am selfish when it comes to social media. I want Podchaser to look good. I want you to look good through Podchaser. So post things that are specific to Podchaser that I can retweet, or I can post on a story on Instagram, or share on our Facebook. What that comes down to a lot of the time is keeping your call to action specific to a specific directory, app, whatever. So if you want Libsyn to repost your podcast, don't put in an Apple Podcast link and a Libsyn link and a Castbox link and all of that stuff. Put in a Libsyn link and that's it. On the other side of that is say nice things about me and I will retweet you all day. That's kind of well. And then make sure your tweet is going to look good for whoever is retweeting it. So that means if you're going to put in hashtags, put in one hashtag and put it at the end and put a break in between. Never in a million years will we repost something that is just full of hashtags. You blind yourself over people who are looking at social media.
Yep. And
I'm getting choked up. I'm so passionate.
I know. To give you just a little bit of a break, and this is just to kind of clarify this. A lot of the time, we feel that Apple Podcasts is like, the big, gigantic, populous, it's the place that gets you the most eyes, if you will, and people tend to appeal to them. You have to understand that the larger brands are so like self-obsessed, right? So exactly what Dave said, you are saying like, hey, look at my podcast. It's so great. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify. As you know, the conversation between Apple Podcasts and Spotify, it's like the way the media is covering them. Oh my gosh, they're like vying for the top. And oh gosh, why in the world would either one of those platforms want to support somebody who has their competitor in the same tweet? Like, don't do that. So concentrate on the one. If you are wanting to love on Apple Podcasts, love on them like with all your might and say like, oh gosh, look at this. I love the embed player that you guys just put on the web. Here's the link. It looks fantastic on my website. Thank you. And I kid you not, they probably will retweet you because you're using their newest embed player on your website. That's the way the companies want to support you, is because you're making, just like what Dave said, look good. And that's what people want. So if you want to be retweeted by the largest brands, go straight to them. Don't cheat on them. I mean, come on. If you're trying to, find a love, you don't like tell them all in one thing. You focus. Okay, go, Dave. Go.
Yes. Thank you. Absolutely. We're vain.
Yeah.
We just the same way you use social media to build your community, to build your show, we use it the same way. And that's something that's important to just be frank about. So that's one way to think about it. You also need to think about social media as building your community. So it's not all, kissing our butts. A lot of it is, engaging with your community. And I see a lot of podcasters out there who do ask questions and they do, try to involve themselves in their conversation. And those are the ones that get traction. It may take a while, but you're out there, you're having a conversation. What I see less of is podcasters who then tie it into their episodes. So if we're talking about community, we're talking about building that conversation, make sure that, you do more than just ask people to follow you on social media. You say, hey, I want you guys to send me a picture of this topic I was talking about. Or, I asked a question on there. I'd love to hear your response. So bring it in there. And when they do respond, talk about it on air, make a little segment in your show, make them feel heard. So those are a few ways that you can engage on social. When you break it down into, kind of the big ones are, you have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You may have some other ones out there. Twitter, keep things pretty short and sweet, keep things organized. Instagram, it's all about what you post. Make sure it's pretty. Simpler is usually better there. If it's an interesting, simple image, people will click through to see what your message is. And then leave yourself some room and hashtag the heck out of it. Instagram is one of those places where you can spam hashtags, and that's something that's good. If you're going to tag a big brand on an Instagram, do so. But again, make sure it's, try to be singular with what you're doing so that it's make it really easy for somebody in my shoes or one of our social media people to hit that, okay, repost to my story. Make it super easy for them.
Yep.
All right. So now we're going to talk about leveraging platforms. So I mentioned Podchaser is a website. We're going to get into some ways that you can leverage that on top of things. But I also want to talk about, Podchaser is not the end all be all by any means. We have a large audience and we're growing really fast, but Apple Podcasts and Spotify have a pretty significant heads up on us. So let's talk about those. There are a couple ways to get discovered on those podcasts. One is through kind of a mini internal organic reach within the platform, which is where if somebody searches for a podcast that is similar to yours or is a similar category, making sure that you show up in those searches. And to do that on a place like Apple, you're really going to want to focus on that metadata again, making sure, when you put out an episode, you talk about what's in the episode. The feed from Libsyn does this really well. Also, She Podcasts, Elsie, you're a rock star. But making sure that you have information in there, making sure that it's discoverable by the search engine of the Apple Podcast. Something that also goes into that is making sure that when you title your podcast, that you're titling it with some indication of what's in the episode. So this goes more towards our nonfiction, our conversational, our documentary folks, but making sure that when you have a guest on your podcast, that you put in parentheses after the title of the podcast, the name of the guest, or as the only title of the episode. Making sure that if you're going to be talking about a specific event from history, that you have some kind of indicator in the title of the show. All of that is going to help you get discovered there. When we talk about how do we get discovered on the actual mechanisms of discovery within those, so like if you go to Apple Podcasts, they have a discover page. Same thing with Spotify. And a couple of ways to get into those is, excuse me, is to understand what those platforms value and how they make charts, how they make discover decisions, all of that. So with an Apple Podcast, there's been a ton of consternation about, leaving reviews. Everybody asks for reviews on Apple Podcasts, all of that stuff. They don't matter. Jack Resider from Darknet Diaries did pretty extensive research into this, and it doesn't matter. It won't boost you up the charts on Apple Podcasts. What they value is subscribers, plays, all of that stuff. So when you're talking about how to leverage their platform with their internal discovery mechanisms, understand that for the most part, an Apple Podcast and a lot of other apps out there really rely purely on, are people listening? And that's it. Are they hitting the play button? Now,
I'm going to just again, a note on this one as well, that is absolutely 100% right. I know that the majority of the calls to action out there, and even with larger brands, and when I'm saying larger brands, I'm talking about like the sort of corporate type podcasts that are being very highly produced, that come from the coast, that are coming from public media or journalistic in nature, broadcasters. You can still hear that. Please go rate us and review on Apple Podcasts because it'll help people find us. That is really not true. That is just not proven. If what does make you be found, exactly what Dave said, is when people subscribe inside of the specific platform and take action in what you are doing inside of that platform, meaning downloading the episode, listening to the episode inside of the platform itself. That's what actually helps the algorithm show up more inside of Apple Podcast and move you up on the rankings. But actually, really, it's more about the search algorithm that it affects. And this is true from what I have been able to tell in the majority of other platforms as well. Spotify is the same thing. I'm assuming that there is a slight algorithm towards people following you on Spotify or listening to your podcast on Spotify. And that's what's going to make you be found. The ratings and reviews are lovely for marketing purposes and for brand awareness. And I'm sure Dave's going to talk about all the ways that you can do that through Podchaser. But in terms of discoverability and leveraging ranking, they don't mean anything. Go for it, Dave.
Absolutely. That's something that comes up also from the YouTube side. So if you post your podcast on YouTube, what YouTube values is watch time or listen time. They value people coming from off platform and hitting the play button. The up and down thumbs up doesn't really matter. Now, as Elsie said, we believe strongly that ratings and reviews should matter. So we've kind of done everything that an Apple podcast doesn't do with their reviews, and we do that at Podchaser. So ratings reviews are directly correlated to you moving up our charts. We think if people are coming out and rating your podcast 5 stars, you should be up there and you should be shown to everybody. Similarly, when somebody leaves a review, it doesn't go sit on a shelf and nobody sees it and it's at the bottom of the page and maybe they see that it's 5 stars or not. No, we show it off. We put it in the homepage news feed so that everybody can see it. Not only your friends, but strangers can see it. We've also done, I've got a tickle. We've also done things like allowing you to reply to reviews. So if you claim your podcast, you can go say thank you to people who leave reviews for you. And then we've done things like make it easier to share so that you have, if you go and right click, or if you go click the share image on a review, you can post it onto a Twitter or Facebook and it will pop up with this nice, bright, shiny review that shows it to the world. The way to think about reviews is Podchaser, you use them for growth. For other platforms, it's okay to ask for reviews there. Just understand it's less tied to growth and more tied to if you want to tell a future sponsor, like, hey, I can drive traffic. That's a good way to show it. But yeah, use Podchaser whenever you guys are asking for reviews. And then when you do ask for reviews, it's important to realize that people listen to podcasts most of the way through. It's like they get to about the 90% mark. When they think it's over, they then tend to head out. So move your reviews to a spot in the episode where people have heard you, they know they're invested, and they're most likely to take action and hear your message. A good way to think about that is the most expensive ad spots are mid-roll spots. Ads that come between the 20 and 60% mark on a podcast are the most expensive for advertisers because they're the most valuable. They work the most. The next most expensive is a pre-roll ad, something that comes within the first 10% of an episode. So think about that. If you're pre-monetization, by all means, use those spots in your episodes to help grow your show. Other things you can do with Podchaser is, again, going back to, you have the ratings and reviews. Ask 10 of your friends to do that. That's going to help boost you up the chart. We look at velocity. If you get 10 people coming on and reviewing your podcast, if you get 50 people coming on reviewing your podcast, that's going to help you out and help you get a boost. Next, we've got lists. We talked about that. Make these lists that appeal to your potential audience. Put them in there. Go on there. Share it with the world. And that's going to help out as well. Making sure your metadata is all involved in there. I mentioned when you claim your podcast, you can add it to categories, making sure you show up in multiple places for search. All of that stuff is going to help you out. And even one thing I mentioned earlier that I didn't mention, which just now with ratings and reviews, is we're partnered with other apps. So if you leave a review on Podchaser, it goes out into the world where people are listening. It's not only visible on Podchaser, it's visible everywhere. So one of the last things you can do for discovery is guest and promo content. So I mentioned that people find new podcasts from other podcasters. So we've kind of probably all heard this, where a podcast or somebody's a guest on a podcast and then they've got a plug at the end. Your plug can be your podcast. Some practical tips on how to be a guest on a podcast is, one, use Podchaser. Go see who else has been guests on podcasts or people in your situation. If they've been on other podcasts, makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of crossover there that will help you find podcasts to pitch. Also, when you're thinking about that, think about what, again, is your value that you're going to bring to that podcast. We mentioned podcasts are a product, listeners get value. Your pitch to a podcaster is, I'm going to make your content better and I'm going to help you grow your show. So ways you can do that are to create a pitch email that explains, what you can talk about, why their audience is going to love it, and then a list of bullet points of what you would do if you were a guest on their show to help grow that episode. Whether it's, I'm going to put an ad on my own podcast that sends people to that episode, or I'm going to post on social media, or I'm going to post something in a newsletter. It's that give and take, and it's that transaction. Ultimately, content is king, and you want to make really good content, and that's what people are going to care about. So you want to talk about that value, but also talk about, how you're going to help that person grow their show. Because even somebody with 1 million downloads every episode wants to grow their show. So think about that. On the cross promo side, the same thing. It's about how you add value to them and how you provide value using your own resources. Guests can be a really powerful driver for your podcast as well. If you have guests on, when you have a guest on, make sure you give them everything they need to really easily respond to you, or really easily promote you. So that means after they've been a guest, after the podcast comes out, send them tweets that they can copy and paste to put out there. Send them messages, ask them directly for what you want them to do. And that will help out. Also go on to Podchaser, add their guest credit so that when somebody searches for them on Google, doesn't know your podcast exists, they hit their Podchaser page, they see that list of everything they've been on, and they click yours because you had them on there. It's a way to kind of extend that period of time when you're hoping the guest helps you out. Okay, we're going to blaze through kind of the rest of the funnel. So we hit discover really hard because it's the main part, but I think it's important to realize that the rest of the funnel also leads to discovery. So after they find out you exist, they're going to try your podcast, and the only objective right here is to hit play. So there's a couple things you can do to help them reach that objective. Obviously, branding, making sure your cover art is something that's flashy, clickable, stands out among it. What you can do is actually go into Paint or Photoshop or whatever you have, take a screenshot of a directory like a Podchaser or an Apple Podcast, then put your cover art in there and see if it pops out. That's a good test to do. Also, when we're talking about that, put in credits on Podchaser. It makes that page look good. The ratings that you bring on is social proof that people like this episode. That's going to help people hit play so they're not taking that kind of risk to see if you're good or not. Next up, so after they've hit play, you want them to return. You want them to follow you. So that's a lot of this has to do with content, but make sure their first impression to your podcast is a really good one. A lot of times we get kind of insidey, jokey with our podcast and everything. And I think it helps everyone to, when we're still trying to grow our podcast, to include or to think about that somebody may be listening for the very, very first time. So things like explainers, happy they're there, what the podcast is about are all good things to include at the beginning of your podcast. Second is call to action. So people don't do what you don't ask them to do. Ask them to subscribe, ask them to follow you on Podchaser, ask them to take action, to come back the next week, ask them to listen to a specific episode in your backlog. Really include that strong call to action. And then show notes. If you want people to follow your podcast, put a link in there that says, hey, follow me on Podchaser, follow me on Apple Podcasts, link to those things, make it very easy for them so that if they're listening on a desktop computer, they can easily go and click it and go to an app of their choice, or to follow you on social media or anything like that. Make it easy. And then share is kind of the bottom of our funnel, which actually takes us right back to the top. And this is where you create evangelists. So we've been talking about audience, potential audience, all of that, but really what we're trying to do is to build a community, build these diehard fans who refer you to their friends, to get the word out there, all of that. So do things like asking questions, reading answers on air, creating a place where you can converse with them outside of the podcast, whether that is on social media or whether that's a Discord channel. Make sure you're driving people there with a call to action. Hey, join my Discord channel. And then once they're there, talking to them, making them feel heard, and then bring that back to your episode. Get it out there. And then as you do that, you're going to build in sustained listeners who go out there, they refer it to their friends, and you're going to kind of create an engine that will grow your podcast, even if you're not trying to. So that about does it for the presentation. I know we're going to hit some Q&A here with the time we have left, but along those lines, please go follow me on Podchaser. My user profile is @Keine, so that right there. Follow Podchaser as well. Go up there, claim your podcast. Follow us on Twitter. We have a lot of fun there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Sweet. All right. So before we get into the questions, I'm just going to answer. Well, not answer, because this wasn't an answer. This is something that I saw that was being discussed. There was a lot of people who are outside of the US, and there was some conversation around YouTube and sharing your podcast on YouTube. I just want to clarify some things as of now. Particularly, I'm a huge proponent of any kind of growth of podcasting outside of the US to really serve a global community. And there are a lot of places outside of the US, particularly in Latin America, who do a massive amount of consumption on YouTube or Facebook of podcasts. And that's literally the only places that they listen to podcasts. And it is really as simple as being able to create a video file of your show with a static template, right? So a static image, and it's just posted. I know that for my wonderful husband, he actually listens to all the content that he listens to on YouTube. My mom listens to my podcast on Facebook, on my Facebook page, and that's kind of how she consumes the content. This data has been shown, particularly in the Edison research study that we partnered with earlier on this year for the Latino Podcast Listener Report, where YouTube is a massive place for podcasting discovery and podcast listening. So it isn't actually against rules for to post your audio content in YouTube at all. It doesn't really dock you in any way. Sometimes it's a little bit on the annoying side to be able to do that, but YouTube Red actually gives you the option to be able to listen to things instead of watching them. So it is actually part of their business model there. Super easy way to do that is to, when you're hosting with us, you actually have a YouTube destination and it automatically does it for you. As you post an episode, you have the option to put a little YouTube template in there, like a rectangle, and it gets posted onto your YouTube channel. You can literally set it and forget it. You don't really have much, and it just naturally goes over there. And that's awesome. Or something like Headliner as well. We've done a couple of webinars with Headliner, and they are a fantastic source to being able to create something that is that way. Mind you, you still have to do the work to be in YouTube, as we know, to have people really engage with your content. But I know that there's been podcasters that are Spanish speaking, specifically from South America, that's their biggest platform is YouTube, and it's where the majority of their listeners come from. And in all honesty, all I say is go keep doing what you're doing, because they are being heard, they are being seen, they are being transformative to their communities. And so it's just another place that you could find it. I just wanted to clarify that, because it's a way that we can start to use our content out there. But anyway, now moving on to some of the questions. We have one of the first questions that's gotten 5 votes here. It's from Kelly, and she asks, what are some budget-friendly ideas for promotion? Dave, do you have any budget-friendly ones?
Absolutely. So I think a really good promotion is actually with giveaways. So if you want your audience to take action, if you want them to share with their friends, if you want them to go rate and review, sometimes you just need to bait the hook for them. So one of the things you can do is say, hey, go leave a rating and review on a Podchaser, or go, share us on Twitter with the hashtag, my podcast name, and say, I'm going to give away, maybe it's, a couple books that appeal to your audience, or maybe it's, a specific item off of Amazon that they would really like. that will help bait the hook, get them out there. And that kind of helps get that, that share bottom of the funnel where they're evangelists, and really kind of motivates them to go share with their audience. Some other things that you can do are, we mentioned cross promos, getting with other podcasters and saying, hey, we'll get out there, we'll promote yours, we'll do an ad spot for your podcast, host read ad, we'll put it in the mid-roll, super valuable space, and you just do the same for your audience. So that costs nothing. It helps both of you out and helps you share your audiences. There's a bunch of other things you can do with budget-friendly ideas, but really I think that's a good way to think about it, is how can I bait the hook on the cheap to get my audience to become evangelists? And then on the other side is what's around me that wants to be promoted by me and will promote my podcast in exchange for that.
Yep. Great. We have so many things to go to that I don't feel like I want to keep going on that. So we have one that got 7 votes, which is really, I'll cover really quickly. What constitutes a listen? This is from Juan. I download listening for 30 seconds plus, or not easy to say. Well, actually it depends, because if you subscribe to the IAB 2.0, the things that they have put together in order to really count things as they are. A listen actually either has to do with the amount of time somebody has listened to the episode, right? So I believe it's up to a minute, or a certain amount of data being downloaded. I cannot give you right now the exact amount. So podcast hosts can either make a choice that is based on the amount of time somebody listens, right? That like it's a progressive download that somebody into like 1 minute, or the amount of data that has been transferred onto the device when the download button was tapped. So downloads and listens are about the same when it comes to the podcasting industry outside of Spotify. Okay. Spotify has their own way of measuring things because everything is on their platform and they have a way that they measure that. YouTube, the same thing. They have their own stuff happening over there. They count listens and all of that stuff at a different place. But in the industry, the apps that you listen to, anything that's Apple Podcast specific, Overcast, Castro, Pocket Cast, all of that stuff, they, when you're using that, the way that the podcast host counts it, if they are IAB 2.0 certified, there are stipulations of what that is, and you can actually look for that online so that you can get your eyes to cross over to start to read all the technical specs, and that you probably won't understand, but the gist is that it's somewhere between either up to a minute or X amount of megabytes that are downloaded, or kilobytes that are downloaded.
Yep. And I also get that question a lot on Podchaser of how that counts. All listens on Podchaser go straight to your hosting provider, and they actually show up as the browser. So it'd be like Google Chrome or something like that. So we don't rehost or anything.
That's very cool. All right. We have a question from Steph. She says, what should podcasters do to help get people who are not listening to podcasts yet into the podcast and Podchaser ecosystem?
Yeah. So first off, shout out to Steph. If you guys have been around, you've probably seen hashtag PodRevDay. That's completely something that Steph created as a way to help promote podcasts in the space, and it's really awesome. So everybody should give her a round of applause. But yeah, to help people who are not listening to podcasts get into podcasting, I think it's important to realize that first impressions are everything. So a lot of the times you have I see people on social media who say, hey, I'm looking to get into podcasts. Which podcast should I listen to? And a bunch of people pile on there and they post their own podcasts. I think it's important to step back and say, okay, what's the best podcast I've ever heard? What's something that somebody could not possibly dislike? A lot of times it's like Serial Season 1, Episode 1. Sometimes that's something like a Reply All. Sometimes that's, a Conan O'Brien episode. Some of these larger podcasts where we'd love people to listen to our podcast, but sometimes it's that foot in the door that just gets people to really enjoy something. In general, when we look at people like celebrities, people like general audience stuff. So if you're looking to try to get like a parent or somebody who's like, oh, I don't know if I like podcasts, send them something they can't possibly hate.
Great job. Right on. All right. So hopefully this is a one for you, Dave. This is from Jeff. Do you pull reviews from other platforms?
We don't right now. I think we're trying to position ourselves more as somebody who can provide reviews everywhere. That doesn't mean we won't be pulling in reviews, but as of right now, it's Podchaser reviews and then reviews left on Podchaser from other apps.
Awesome. This one's from Carly. She says, I work in a multinational marketing team. I would like to know if it's possible to pay for to appear higher in a podcast app search or for certain keywords. For Apple Podcast and Spotify, I don't believe that you can do that, but there are some places like Overcast and Castro who do actually take sponsorship. If anybody is from the Castbox team, I'm not quite sure if y'all can take advertising or not advertising, but like platform sponsorship, if you will, promoted posts. There are a lot of individual apps that do offer promoted posts. The ones that come to my mind, which are my loves and I love them so much, are both Overcast and Castro, and they do have, you can actually purchase that ranking. Other than that, it doesn't really work for everything else. And Carly, I know that you asked a question about video podcasts as of now, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of the conversation that we're having today. It's a complete and different strategy here. But what I'm saying, YouTube is its own thing, which there's many tutorials on YouTube about how to leverage YouTube. And I think as of now, the audio podcasts are still the thing. In fact, if you have a video podcast, I think that there are only 7, I may be wrong, but I think that there's only 7 podcast apps out of the hundreds out there that actually support video consumption in your video to be able to see them. So it's just a lot of work for not very little gain.
Also, I ran a video podcast for a while, and one of the things that comes up a lot in that maybe people don't realize is it tenfolds your production pipeline to actually have real video with editing, with effects, all of that stuff. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. And then also, if you don't do it well, it actually can kind of hurt your podcast. Whereas audio kind of smooths over a lot of the imperfections or a lot of the opportunities for editing. Video doesn't give you as much of a safety net. So it's something you should definitely be on YouTube. But before you think about doing video, really take a hard look at if you have the bandwidth and if you can do it right.
Correct. Okay, how to connect to show you were a guest or mentioned on your profile. Do you have should we share that Notion page that you shared for Cheryl? Because I think it probably has some tips on how to do that for Podchaser.
Absolutely. So to connect your show, you were a guest on or mentioned on profile, we have a nice handy button. If you go to that episode or that podcast, it just says add appearances. You add that. You can add yourself. You can add whoever else. If Elsie was on a podcast and she's not listed yet, you can add it in there, and that will again go through our moderation queue.
Cool. Let me skip a couple of these here just because I've had we have a lot of stuff here to kind of deal with. Oh, hi. Oh, here we go. So Magnus asks for you. Hi there, Podchaser International. My podcast is in Danish, and I was just wondering if Podchaser supports other languages and such. How wide is the website?
Yeah, so we allow for other languages. We don't limit it to only US or only English podcasts. We have a beta filter right now. It's not 100% yet, but you can go, and if you search through Podchaser, you can actually hit the filter button and filter it by language, and see how many come up, browse like that. I would say Podchaser's primary audience is English speaking countries. So US is by far our primary user group, and then the UK, Australia, Canada, all of those come up, and then we get into Germany and France and all of that. We are looking to do international versions of Podchaser here in the next year. It's just about getting the funds together to actually translate the UI.
All right, we are going a little bit over here. I'm going to try and scan through some of the things that we have going on. Jim, I'm going to answer your question really quickly. He says, I host on Libsyn. How important is the Apple description info? It's limited to 512 spaces. I put a huge description in the Libsyn field above it. You are correct. That is actually the larger field, and that is what we refer to as episode notes or show notes, right? So that description field in there, Apple decided that they were going to deprecate. So at this, you don't need to fill it out or put anything in it. That said, though, they might be changing their mind, which seems to be the thing that they're doing. As of now, there's no reason for you to put anything in there. You can't find that anywhere. It used to be a tag that was asked for by Apple, and now they deprecate, but they might be bringing it back again. So that's why it's still there. But don't worry about it. Put everything inside the description. The end. Let's see. Gosh. Here's another Podchaser. Can a podcast network get listed on Podchaser? If so, are there any specifics needed?
Yeah, so if you're trying to claim multiple podcasts on that podchaser.com/claim, we have a little button there that kind of helps out people who are maybe they have 20 podcasts that they want to claim. So that's one way to do it. We're working on network pages. We don't have those yet. But one of the things you can do in the interim is to use that list feature and create a list that's, Libsyn podcasts or whatever your network is, and put them in there. And that's an easily shareable thing that allows people to go on and quickly follow them all, rate them all, add them to their own list.
Great. Awesome. And we have another question here for you all. Do you promote or spotlight shows? If so, how? And is there a process to submit to be spotlighted? Now, I don't know if that's for Podchaser or for Libsyn, but I assume that it's for you. So you go ahead and take it.
Yeah. So Podchaser itself is very dedicated to being kind of, democratic in how we run our platform. So you won't find a heavily curated site. That said, we do Podchaser account lists from time to time, usually like a weekly discover list. We also do things like trending emails, all of that stuff. We try to keep a really light touch, but if you think that that we should highlight your show, one of the best ways is to just follow us on social media. Oftentimes we put out calls there. Like we put out calls for if we want to make a podcast of the day, send us your submissions. And then also after this call, I'll post on Twitter real quick with a form that you can use to submit to be considered more long-term.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So we have a lot of questions in there that are very specific to like some how-to stuff inside of Podchaser. The team has posted, or has posted a Notion database in there where all kinds of really fantastic, like knowledge-based type of help desk articles of how to do all of the little questions that y'all are asking in there, claiming your show, and how do you add this and that, and all of those lovely little things here. So I don't want to go ahead and take up some time when it comes to any of those things.
And I will say real quick, Elsie, if anybody has questions, contact at podchaser.com is a great way to get in touch. Also our DMs on social media. And then we have a Slack page that's linked on our website, and we're really quick with any support options.
Yep. All right. Somebody, it seems, has their stuff on Podchaser and has some premium episodes that are supposedly not available into their public feed. I assume that.
That's not good.
Yeah. You probably need to reach out to your podcast host, possibly, and then ask them, because that's usually how you kind of figure out all of that detective work when it comes to that. I really don't think that has anything to do with Podchaser.
Everything we do is from our RSS feeds from places like Libsyn. So it may be that there was a permission on the host side that wasn't fully on. But either way, like we take that very seriously. So we're going to jump on that.
I don't know if you want to scan through there, Dave, to look at some of the ones that you want to answer, because there's a lot of them that are slightly, I mean, I understand about growth and stuff like that, but they are very outside of what we're talking about right now. And we will be here the entire night.
I see one real quick that says, can you to claim a podcast, can you add the code to show notes that already exist, or do you need to wait to add to a new episode? You can just do that to any episode. And again, give it probably 2 to 3 minutes just to make sure it propagates through the hosting provider. But that's one way you can do it. You can also claim via email, and we just use the email that's associated with your podcast to verify that you own it.
Yep.
And
one more question before we kind of at least wrap it up. I'll let you answer one more and then we're done. It's a question from Caitlin. How do you put a podcast on Facebook? And actually, you really can't do that. Facebook does not support audio, the end. They just don't. And they change their mind all the time. They used to, then they didn't, and then no players and all the stuff. So the way that we solve that problem over at Libsyn is in the same way that the problem for YouTube, which is if you have your show on Libsyn and you do your whole thing and then you publish it out, we have things called destinations. So it means that you can actually shoot your episode out to all of these different places, right? So you have normal places like Radio Public and Player FM and like Spotify, stuff like that, where you listen. But we also have other places like Facebook or YouTube, where what happens is you upload your audio, and then if you set up your destination, we transcode into a video, and then it goes into those platforms and it posts as a video, but it has a play button on it, so people can listen or play it, but it's actually a video with a static image. So you can do that. And that's the way that's the way my mom listens to my podcast, is when I cross post to my Facebook page. So, okay, your turn, Dave. You take one more and then goodbye.
Yeah. So Carly asked if we encourage people to use Podchaser who maybe aren't familiar or non-podcaster, are they going to understand it? And it's actually something that is a great question, because like Steph asked earlier, how do you get new podcast listeners to listen to podcasts? Podchaser is actually a great place there. And I'm not just saying that because I'm, Podchaser person, but being a website, it works on every platform. So they don't have to go download an app. They don't have to have an iPhone or anything like that. They don't have to set up an account even to play an episode. Anybody can go on there without logging in. They can play your episode. They can read all of the data. We don't user wall anything. They can do it. If they want to rate and review, then they need to sign up. But again, we make that really easy. Also, if they don't want to listen on Podchaser, we have an app section which showcases a bunch of different apps that they can easily click through. So Podchaser is a really good landing page to use in general, because it's kind of is a one size fits all, in the same way that you may find that there's link aggregators out there for podcast landing pages. It's just ours allows you to then bookmark episodes, rate and review, click and browse through more episodes, all of that stuff. So I would actually recommend Podchaser. I used it before I worked here. It's a really good general landing page that works for anybody.
Great. Okay, cool. I think that we're wrapping up here. Tammy, I see that you posted a question. Can we get the details on the Facebook post thing Elsie was talking about? Team Libsyn, can you find that in the help desk, please? And then just post it in the chat there for later on and stuff. And also to make sure that anything, again, Dave gave us this fantastic database with all of these great articles that y'all can go check out in terms of Podchaser. Shout out to Steph. I see that you're in there. I know that it's past midnight your time now, sweet lady. She's this really wonderful thing every 8th of the month, every single month, where you can, it's like a review thing that she started together, Pod Rev Day, is that correct? Pod Rev Day, yeah, that's right. And so it's not a tit for tat. It's not like you do me, I do you kind of thing. It really is, you take it upon yourself, your onus. You are a podcast listener because you love it, and you go into Podchaser and you review one of your favorite shows or one of your an episode that you just listened to. You do it because you love it, because you want to support a podcaster, not because you're going to get anything back. And Stephanie has really she took the helm on that, and she's been pushing through now for like almost a year, I think, Steph, right? And this is something that we can collectively do, again, from the goodness of our heart, give a present to another podcast without expectations of somebody doing that for us. And then we are collectively moving into Podchaser and helping that out and making sure that people really know the stuff. One last thing that I think, Dave, I mean, I don't know if you talked about this, is the fact that you can very easily share a lot of the Podchaser reviews on social for social proof, to show people what you have there, or to even just tell somebody, I just left this review to my favorite show. It's really hard to do anything like that outside of Apple Podcasts. You have to take a screenshot. You can't copy paste. I mean, there's all kinds of different stuff. So on Podchaser, you can actually do that very easily, to be able to share some of those reviews on social, and that's social, and they make it so easy. So please go ahead and start that. Thank you so much, Dave, for spending this over hour with. Thank you all for sticking around. Thank you so much for being here so late in some of you guys' homes. We so appreciate it. If you do want to follow me, you can follow at Libsyn, the Libsyn account. I run all of the social, so all the different places, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all of those fun things. In our blog, we have lovely things. You can listen to the feed, the official Libsyn podcast, which I co-host with Rob Walsh. And also, you can follow me personally. I'm at the Elsie Escobar everywhere. I tend to be on Twitter a lot. I lurk on Instagram, and I hate Facebook. So just to let you know, I mean, so don't ever talk to me there. So, but alas, thank you so much for everybody. I am going to go ahead and end this today, and I hope you all have a lovely end of the year, and we look forward to supporting you in 2021. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.